Bedtime should be a joyous occasion for a tired child, but for me it was terrifying. In my childhood, bedtime was something really scary. Somewhere in the back of my mind I am still terrified of what went on back then. As someone with a degree, I can't prove that what happened to me was an objective reality, but I can swear that what I experienced was sheer terror. A terror that I can't compare to anything else. I don't remember exactly when it started, but I became afraid to sleep when I was moved into a private room. I was 8 years old at the time, and up until that point I had quite happily shared a room with my older brother. As is quite understandable for a boy 5 years older than me, my brother eventually wanted a room of his own, and as a result I was assigned a room at the back of the house. It was a small, narrow, but oddly elongated room, with only a bed, dresser, and desk to fit in it. I couldn't complain because even at that age I realized that we didn't have a very big house, and I had no reason to be upset that I was supposedly deprived since my family was loving and caring. The lone window overlooked our backyard, nothing out of the ordinary, but even during the day, the light streaming into the room seemed almost imperceptible. When my brother got a new bed, I got the old bunk bed we used to share. Although it was frustrating that I would be sleeping alone, I was thrilled at the thought of being able to sleep on the top bunk, which seemed much more appealing. From that very first night, I remember a strange sense of unease slowly creeping in from the back of my mind. I was lying on the top bunk, looking at my toys and cars scattered across the green and blue carpet. While imaginary battles and adventures were taking place between the toys on the floor, I couldn't escape the feeling that my gaze was slowly drawn to the bottom bunk, as if something was moving in the corner of my eye. The bunk was empty, with a tucked-in dark blue blanket lying on it, partially covering 2 white pillows. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I was a kid, and the noise of my parents' TV coming on under the door gave me a warm sense of security. I fell asleep. A little later my deep sleep was interrupted by the sound of some kind of movement. It took me a few moments before I realized what was happening. Something was moving, there was no doubt about it. At first I wasn't sure what it was. It was dark everywhere, almost pitch black, but the light streaming in from the window was enough to outline this cramped room. 2 thoughts appeared in my mind almost simultaneously. The first was that my parents were definitely asleep, because the house outside my door was dark and silent. The second thought had to do with the noise. A noise that had obviously woken me up. As the last remnants of sleep faded from my consciousness, the noise took on a more distinct sound. Sometimes the simplest sounds can be the most frightening, the cold wind whistling outside the window, or, as in this case, the simple sound of bedclothes rustling in the dark. The sheets rustled in the darkness, as if someone was trying to get comfortable on the bottom bunk. I lay there in disbelief, thinking that the noise was either my imagination or just my cat finding a comfortable place to sleep. Just then I noticed my door, which was closed. Perhaps my mom had come into my room at night, and that's when the cat snuck here. Yeah, that was probably it. I turned my face to the wall and closed my eyes, hoping to go back to sleep. When I moved, the rustling beneath me stopped. I thought I must have disturbed the cat, but quickly realized that the visitor on the bottom bunk was much bigger than my little cat. Something downstairs began to stir violently. I could hear the sheets rustling, as if someone were kicking them violently against the bed. Fear came over me, not like the subtle anxiety I had felt before, but intense and terrifying. My heart pounded frantically and my eyes scanned the almost impenetrable darkness in panic. I screamed. Of course my mom couldn't help but react to my scream. I heard footsteps on the other side of the house, but just as I was beginning to sigh with relief that my parents were coming to rescue me, the bed suddenly began to shake violently like an earthquake and bang against the walls. I heard the sheets beneath me stir. I wanted to run away, but I was afraid the creature on the bottom bunk would reach out and grab me, so I stayed where I was, clutching my own blanket like a shield to my white knuckles. The wait seemed like an eternity. At last the door, thankfully, opened and light from the hallway came into the room, and I dared and looked down, but there was no one on the bottom bunk. I cried, and my mother comforted me. Tears of fear and relief streamed down my face. However, in spite of all the terror, I did not tell her why I was so frightened. I can't explain it, but I felt like what was in that bunk would come back if I mentioned it. Whether that was actually the case, I don't know, but as a child, it seemed to me that this invisible threat was near. My mom lay down on the empty bunk, promising to stay there until morning. Eventually my anxiety lessened, fatigue pushed me back to sleep, but I was still tense, waking up several times to the sound of rustling sheets. I remember the next day wanting to go anywhere. To be anywhere but in that cramped, suffocating room. It was Saturday, and I was happily playing outside with my friends. Although our house wasn't very big, we were lucky to have a big yard in the back. We often played there as most of the garden was overgrown and we could hide in the bushes, climb the big rock and so on. As fun as all this was, every now and then my gaze would turn to that little window in my room. Even playing with my friends couldn't completely distract me from my anxiety. Every hair stood up. The feeling that there was something in the room, watching me play and waiting for the night when I would be alone, never left me. It may seem strange, but when my parents sent me to my room for the night, I didn't say anything. I didn't protest, I didn't even make excuses as to why I couldn't sleep there. I just went to that room, climbed a few stairs to the top bunk, and waited. I was afraid of being a stupid kid, afraid that my brother would laugh at me and my childish fears. But that was not the only reason. I still felt that the creature would be furious if I told anyone about him. That night I heard again the first random movements of the sheets under my bunk. One word crashed sharply into my head. Ghost. As that thought came to me, I noticed that my uninvited guest had stopped moving. The sheets lay still, but in place of the noise of the sheets came something much more disgusting. Slow, rhythmic, hoarse breathing was coming out of whatever lay beneath. I shuddered and hoped it would ever go away. The house, like the night before, was plunged into darkness. Silence reigned, save for the eerie breathing of the creature from the bottom bunk. I lay there terrified. I just wanted the creature to go away, to leave me alone. What did it want? Then something undeniably chilling happened. It moved. And it didn't move like it had before. It began thrashing about all over the bottom bunk, a creature lying in the dark that seemed intent on terrorizing me all night. Its labored breathing grew louder now. Only the mattress and a few flimsy wooden slats separated me from the creepy creature below. As I lay there, my eyes filled with tears. I thought that nothing could be worse in my life. I imagined what the creature looked like sitting there watching me from below, hoping to catch the slightest hint that I was awake. Then the imagination turned into a frightening reality. It began to touch the wooden slats on which my mattress lay. Then with great force it angrily pushed its limb between the two slats into the mattress. Even through it, it felt like someone was digging their fingers into my side. I squealed, and the wheezing creature on the bunk below answered me in kind, furiously beginning to shake the bed as it had the night before. Small flakes of paint sprinkled onto my blanket from the wall as the bed frame scraped against it. I was flooded again by the light from the door opening, my mom standing on the doorstep, as always, with a comforting hug and soothing words that finally quieted my tantrum. Of course she asked what happened, but I was afraid to tell the truth. I just said I had a nightmare. It went on like that for weeks, if not months. Night after night I would wake up to the sound of rustling sheets. Each time I would scream to not give the thing time to reach me. With each scream, the bed would shake violently and then quiet down with the arrival of my mother, who spent the rest of the night on the bottom bunk. Along the way, I managed to fake illness a few times and come up with other, less truthful reasons to sleep in my parents' bed, but more often than not, I stayed in that room alone for the first few hours of each night. With time, you can get used to almost anything, no matter how awful it is. I realized that for some reason this creature couldn't hurt me when my mother was around. I'm sure the same could have been said for my father, but as loving as he was, waking him from his sleep was nearly impossible. After a few months, I got used to my nocturnal visitor. I was still very much afraid of him. My greatest fears came in the winter. The days were getting shorter and the long nights only provided more opportunities for this creature. It was a difficult time for my family. My grandmother, an amazingly kind and gentle woman, developed dementia after my grandfather died. My mother tried her best to prevent her condition from worsening, but dementia is a cruel disease that robs a person of memories and consciousness day after day. Soon she no longer recognized any of us, and it became clear that she would have to be moved from her home to a nursing home. Before the move, Grandma was having a particularly hard time, and my mom decided she would stay with her. As much as I loved my grandmother and worried about her illness, to this day I feel guilty that my first thoughts were not of her, but of what that thing might do to me if it found out about my mom's absence. Her presence was the only thing I was sure protected me from that horror. I rushed home from school that day and immediately tore the sheets and mattress off the bottom bunk, removed all the slats and put up the old desk, dresser, and a few chairs we had stored in the closet. I told my father that I was setting up a place to work, because I didn't need a second bunk, which he thought was a great idea and said I was growing up, but really I was doing it so that that thing wouldn't have a chance to take the bottom bunk. As darkness fell, I lay there knowing my mom wasn't in the house. I didn't know what to do. My only impulse was to reach into her jewelry box and retrieve the small family crucifix I had seen there before. Although my family wasn't very religious, at that age I still believed in God and hoped it would somehow protect me. Despite my fear and anxiety, clutching the crucifix under my pillow tightly with one hand, sleep eventually came, and as I fell asleep, I hoped I would wake up in the morning without incident. Unfortunately, this night was the worst of all. I woke up gradually. The room was dark again. As my eyes adapted, I was able to make out the window, the door, the walls, some toys on a shelf, and even now I shudder to think of it, because there was no noise, not a rustle of sheets, no movement. The room seemed lifeless, but not empty. This creepy creature that terrorized me night after night was not on the bottom bunk, but in my bed. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. All sound had disappeared from my voice with horror. I lay still. I didn't want it to know I was awake. I couldn't see it yet, I could only feel it. It was hidden under my blanket. I recognized its shape and felt its presence, but I didn't dare turn my head. Its weight was pressing against my side, a sensation I will never forget. I lay like that for hours. It would have been daylight by now if it had been summer, but winter drags on long and inexorably, and I knew it would be hours before sunrise. I was a timid child by nature, but I knew when I could wait no longer. The fear was really wearing me down. I had to get out of this bed, and then I remembered the crucifix. My hand was still under the pillow, but there was nothing in it. I moved my wrist slowly and carefully, trying to find it, but I couldn't. Either I had thrown it off the top bunk or the creature had snatched it out of my hand. Without the crucifix, I lost all hope. Even at such a young age, one can be acutely aware of what death is and greatly fear it. I knew I would die in that bed if I lay there idly. I had to escape, but how? Jump off the bed and hope I would make it to the door? What if it was faster than me? Or slowly slip out of the top bunk, hoping not to disturb the creature? Realizing it hadn't moved when I moved, trying to find the crucifix, I wondered. What if it couldn't hear me? It hadn't made a sound since I woke up. Or maybe it was just playing with me. After all, it had done this countless nights, and now that I was right next to it, pressed against the mattress, with no mother to protect me, maybe it was holding back, savoring its victory until the last moment. I tried to breathe as little as possible and, gathering all my strength, I slowly reached up with my right hand and began to pull the blanket off of me. What I discovered under that blanket almost made my heart stop. I couldn't see it, but when my hand moved the blanket, it came across something cold. Something that resembled a bony hand. I held my breath in horror as I was sure this something must have recognized that I was awake. Nothing. It didn't move. I moved and touched it again in another place, and it felt like it was made of bones and joints, like a wild arthropod creature. God, it's moving. The thought flashed through my mind. It was moving. It was barely perceptible, but I felt its limb digging into my shoulder. As its arms slowly wrapped around me, my right foot traveled along the cool wall where the bed stood. Of everything that happened to me in that room, this was the strangest. I realized his torso was sticking out of the wall. Suddenly its grip went from a slow tightening to a sharp squeeze. It pulled and clawed at my clothes as if afraid I would break free. I struggled against it, but his exhausted hand seemed stronger than I was. Its head lifted, wriggling under the blanket. Now I realized where it was taking me. It was trying to pull me into the wall. I fought for my life, I cried, and suddenly my voice came back to me. I screamed and screamed, but no one came. Then I realized why it was pulling me so suddenly and aggressively. Through the window the first rays of sunlight broke through. I fought on, knowing that if I could hold on, it would soon disappear. As I fought for my life, the parasite shifted, slowly pulling itself up to my chest, its head now sticking out from under the blanket. It wheezed. I passed out as its skinny fingers wrapped around my neck. I woke up to my father calling me to breakfast. I had the most horrible experience of my life. Later I moved the bed away from the wall, placing furniture there that I thought would prevent the creature from getting out. I had no idea it would try to take me. Weeks passed without incident, but one cold, frosty night I awoke to the furniture shaking violently where my bed used to be. In a moment it was quiet, and I lay there sure I could hear a distant wheezing sound coming from deep within the wall. The next year I was assigned a larger room on the other side of the house, and my parents took this room. They said they didn't need a bigger room and I was growing and would need more space. After 10 days my parents suddenly said we were moving. They packed everything up literally in one day, and already in the evening we moved out. And I think I can guess what caused it.